Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com/changelog. Move fast and fix things like we do here at changelog. Catch your errors before your users do with Rollbar. If you're not using Rollbar yet or you haven't tried it yet, they have a special offer for you. Go to rollbar.com/changelog. Sign up and integrate Rollbar to get $100 to donate to open source projects via Open Collective. Once again, rollbar.com/changelog. Welcome back. You're listening to the Changelog, a podcast featuring the hackers, the leaders, and the innovators of software development. I'm Adam Stacoviak, editor-in-chief here at Changelog. Today, Jerod and I are talking to Dominic Tarr, creator of EventStream, the I/O library that made recent news as the latest malicious package in the NPM registry. EventStream was turned malware designed to target a very specific development environment and harvest account details and private keys from Bitcoin accounts. We talked through Dominic's backstory as a prolific contributor to open source, his stance on this package, his work in open source, the sequence of events around this hack, how he can and should handle maintainership of open source infrastructure over the full life cycle of the code's usefulness, and what some best practices are for moving forward from this kind of attack.
So we're here in the wake and aftermath of a EventStream malware incident that happened to the open source community, to the NPM community, to the JavaScript community, and to Dominic himself, the maintainer of the repository and NPM package. Former maintainer, yes. Thank you for correcting me. Please correct us as we go here, as there's lots of details and we're definitely going to probably slip up on some of them. But for those who weren't on the internets on and around November 26th, 2018, we will recall some of the events that happened to catch everybody up and get us all on the same page. So there is a repository and package called EventStream, which was created by Dominic Tarr and maintained up until recently by him, which had an issue opened on November 20th. Of this year by a fella goes by Falling Snow. I think his name is Ayrton Sparling. Probably mispronounced, but the best I can do there. And he was wondering what had happened to this repo and why specific access was given to a GitHub user by the name of Write9Control or Write9CTRL. He had found some issues there and was asking about it. And it turns out that this person injected some malware into the NPM package, to a specific version of EventStream, which was used by many folks, and that was very problematic. Now, this caused all sorts of confusion, conversation, some yelling, some nice things. It caused a lot of discussion on Monday and some actions. Thankfully, NPM acted pretty quickly, and the package was removed the morning of November 26th. The initial incident was about a week earlier, but didn't really hit too much of the zeitgeist until Monday. Dominic's here with us. Dominic made a statement on November 26th, and we're here to talk about that and talk about the aftermath, what causes these problems, really open source, the community and the culture writ large, because there's huge implications and lots of fun stuff. So that's my summary. Adam, Dominic, please hop in and help me out there or fix any things I had wrong, and we can get going.
Yeah, so I woke up that morning to a friend telling me that that issue had been posted all over the internet and I might want to block it or something. And I was actually quite excited because I thought that issue brought to attention quite important issues for open source. So I made everyone was very excited about it. So I made a statement about it. But I think I'd like to explain how everything fell into place. I wrote this the event stream module when I wrote like 7 years ago, and at that time, like Node.js, like Node.js is now like hugely popular. Like there was like now there's like hundreds of thousands of modules in the npm. Back then, it was like tens of thousands. I'd been involved with Node since I remember when there were 1,000 packages in npm, and that being like celebrated like as a big thing.
Big deal. Yeah.
And so event stream was like of that era, and it was like I went on to write a huge number of like stream related modules, and then and event stream was actually the very first one that I wrote, and I wrote it, and then after like about, I think it was 11 months of like stream experience, I realized that event stream was kind of the wrong basis, and I wrote a thing called through, which became the basis for all of my streams stuff after that. And so even by that point, so that was like 6 years ago, I had basically moved on from event stream and wasn't really interested in, like I wasn't using it as like my first go-to thing for writing streams anymore. And then like another maybe like a year or two after that, the like Node core team had decided they were going to like fix all the problems with streams and create streams 2. And I hadn't managed to like participate in any of these discussions on like what was going to go in streams 2 because it was all at this like Node conference in California, and I wasn't there. And when I saw like what they wanted to add, I was like, this is like horribly like bloated and ugly. But it was also backwards compatible, which like made it like twice as bad. And so I started like I tried some mild protesting, and they were just like, "Oh, we're ready to really decided that this is how we're going to do it." And that sort of spurred me to be like, well, if you were going to really make a really minimal, efficient stream thing that wasn't backwards compatible with the current streams, what would it look like? And I started experimenting, and with me and some friends and stuff, I came up with pull stream. And pull stream is like really like minimal. Like you just have 2 functions. One function is like just a normal Node async function that you call it repeatedly, like one at a time. And the other, so that's like you have a readable function, and then you have a reader function, which is a function that the readable was passed to. And I've got detailed blog posts about both the history of Node.js streams and pull streams. So you can, I think those are on dominictarr.com. But the point is like pull stream was like, I decided this was actually so much better. It solved several of the like problems that Node streams had like error propagation. So like if an error occurs somewhere in the stream, it like cleans up and aborts the whole stream, and you end up getting that the stream ended in error. And it was like, for just moving like data about like you did with event stream, it was just like much more minimal and lightweight and efficient, and benchmarks that it was like faster and stuff like this. Even though I hadn't really tried to optimize it, I had just written less code. So I had like fully moved on. By that point, I was like, this thing is great. I've really tried to promote pull streams. Some people cottoned on, and there's like a pretty good community of people that use it. But anyway, by the time, like that was also several years ago. So I had like completely moved on from event stream like twice.
Yeah, not only had you stopped, working on it, maintaining it, but you had replaced it with, but things that you consider much better quality, the way to go. So, I mean, this was like, in your mind, this particular package was ancient history, right?
Yeah, and it was like, at that point, it wasn't like really popular yet. I think it became popular when Gulp used it. So Gulp was, Gulp still, I never used Gulp. It's like a build tool. It's kind of like Make or something like that. It's for building all of your project and stuff like that. And, I always felt that JavaScript didn't really need one of those. But anyway, Gulp happened and got pretty big, and it used event stream. And the first version used event stream in its like example documentation and stuff. So that's when it actually became more popular. But that was after I had already moved on to pull streams, funnily enough. So
you moved on twice, then it became popular, and you're still moved on from this project. Like, from how you use it, its usefulness to you, not so much just the project, but how its usefulness to you, like how you use it to develop applications or using your tools and tool chain but Grunt made it popular. Grunt, Gulp, all those. I'm not sure if Grunt may have used it or not, but they were all in. No, you said Gulp. I said Grunt.
Yeah, it's Gulp.
Gulp.
They all run together to me. Grunt, Gulp, all in the same era of like this events as streams to build things era prior to Webpack becoming more and more popular and things changing.
So the real interesting thing about this situation is that the compromise or the injection of this code didn't come from hacking GitHub's permissions or npm.js.com. It was really a third party who came to you on a project that, like you said, you moved on from twice. This is the Right 9 control user on GitHub, which is no longer a user on GitHub, of course, a malicious actor, and must have been acting like a normal person and obtained credentials to this repository basically by asking for them, and then used that access to basically, he or she added, according to Falling Snow, flat map stream, which has an injection in it. Very, very briefly added it, published a new version, and then took it out in order to kind of cover their tracks and leave the actual installed version, of course, on as many computers as possible.
Right.
And so that's really the bigger picture of this, is like, this was an interesting and unfortunate situation, but one that is like very difficult for you to see coming, right? So tell us about this, maintainer that you added. And I know you're kind of working your way there with this story of how Event Stream is like outside of your own mind and use. Tell us about that decision. Was it a long time ago? Was it recently? Was it?
Well, that was like start of September. It was like a few months. It was only a few months ago.
Okay.
And so I hadn't, like, my maintenance of Event Stream was basically like ignoring it. I hadn't made any like feature changes in like 5 years. Like, basically, I just, like, if anyone made a feature change, I'd tell them to publish it as a module.
Let me throw out a couple of stats about Dominic, because I doubt he would say these things himself in order to boast. But if you're thinking about Dominic Tarr's perhaps like Event Stream was, one of his a couple packages he's written, how could you ignore this thing that you toiled over? Dominic has at the time of this call 628 source repos on GitHub. That means those are non-forks. He actually created those repositories, and 422 packages published on NPM under his name. In November alone, Dominic, according to GitHub's activity, you've done 257 commits on 33 repositories in November. So I would call that prolific in your open source work and product. So Event Stream at this point was an old package that you wrote, a thing that you moved on from twice. And it's not like you've got the 6 packages that you care for. It's like you have hundreds of packages. And so, like you said, the maintenance on that was you were basically ignoring it.
Yeah, and like none of my friends used it either. Like, it was basically just things that like so I would occasionally get like, issues or support or emails because of it. And I was like, these are all just like annoying. But it was just like, I wish this would go away. And then someone like emailed me and was like, hey, this was useful to me. Can I could spend a few hours a week like maintaining it. And I was like, hell yes. Like, I jumped at the chance. Like, please,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Like, you're the first person who's actually offered to help. So I gave it to them. And then this is like a critical thing that really like ended up exasperating the whole situation, is that then like in between then and now, maybe a month later, I was like, I had a whole bunch of other old modules that I was like no longer really interested in, that I didn't use. And occasionally people would post issues and make pull requests and stuff like this. And it was always like a huge bummer for someone to like earnestly come looking for like help or want to merge, or make some change or something like this. And then, this would require me to like probably think about the implications of their change or something like this for like at least like 20 minutes or something. And I no longer just like I moved on from all of these things. And it was just kind of like a huge bummer to like tell them like, look, I just can't be bothered. Like, I'm just not interested in working on this. Like, and it was like not the like the 20 minutes or something. It was just the like letting some stranger like down that hard. That was actually, I realized that was what was getting to me. And then because I have hundreds of modules, I had to and that I wanted to disown in bulk. So I've actually written more like 700 and something modules. And in between handing off event stream and now, I disowned 340 of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I wanted to do it in a way that I would no longer have access to them. So I created an email and then used a random password that I forgot, and then used that to sign up for another NPM account called No Persons Modules, and then forgot the password to that as well. So I can't log into these things. And then I transferred hundreds of modules to that account, which now no one controls. I emailed NPM support and told them I was doing this as well for
Wow.
based mental health reasons.
Drastic measures.
Yeah, but it was quite cathartic to just be these no longer my responsibility, and the things that I still retain control of are the things that I actually use, directly or indirectly. Mostly, maybe there's a few things I could clean up as well, and then there were a couple of cases where I had added someone else as a publisher as well. And so if someone else was already a publisher, I just removed myself from those modules. And EventStream fell into this category where someone else seemed to be an active maintainer. And at that point, they seemed to be legitimately maintaining EventStream. So I was just okay, that's under control. And I'll just so I no longer had access to it. And by the time they report the attack, I was sorry, I actually can't help you. I don't have access to this module anymore.
Was this recently then, this cathartic moment for you? Because you said that control, what was it? What's the person name? Right Nine Control?
Right Nine Control.
Reached out a few months ago and asked you for commit bits so that they can help you maintain. You gave it to them. So was this cathartic moment you're talking about where you did this, deliberate?
Yeah, it was something like a couple of weeks after that or something like that. Okay. Yeah, basically it was a coincidence. There was basically a coincidence of timing. I think if I hadn't have done that, then when someone reported this thing, I would have been okay, well, we'll just unpublish that version, remove this weird thing and stuff like that. It probably never would have made the news because it would have been dealt with in that issue.
Right.
But because I had forcibly I'd locked myself out of it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Then
you really couldn't go in and see the day.
This was a perfect storm. And let me just say that it was a pretty sophisticated social engineering attack, because that's really what it is, right? We talk about hacking into computers and whatnot, and we realize over time, go all the way back to Kevin Mitnick, the best crackers are the ones that just ask for permit, just ask for your password or act like they're somebody else and get a password. Most people were very forward with information, and this was a situation where this person picked really a prime repository where, it hasn't been active. Probably the issues were building up. You can tell when somebody's ignoring one of their repositories just by doing a little bit of research. And then not only that, but so deployed, right? Which you can probably see via NPM download stats, on builds and stuff, how many downloads of this particular package in the last month. And then, really weaseled their way in. So it's so interesting that, why we found out about this. First of all, I think Falling Snow is a saint. I love people so thanks Falling Snow for, doing this. I don't know what you were doing, necessarily poking around and finding this thing, but shedding light on these things. But then also the fact, Dominic, that you had removed your own access from NPM. And so there was really nothing you could do. This was going to have to be brought into the light. And so here we have it.
Yeah. But I think one thing important to note is that the attack that Right Nine Control was trying to pull off was actually a very targeted attack. It only actually affected a specific Bitcoin wallet that I understand hadn't actually been fully released or something yet. So it didn't actually end up doing any
massive damage.
It ended up failing completely. The damage was all basically people's time got wasted because they had to remove the code.
I wonder if they were targeting a specific person that they knew used EventStream or something. Of course, that's all just
they were. It was this. No, it's quite obvious who they were targeting because the malicious payload was encrypted, and the key to the encryption was
the wallet.
Yeah, it was the name of the wallet thing. It was like it goes into environment variable that is set when it's run inside an app. And so when they found that there was some suspicious encrypted material in the minified file, but they had to like go through every single module that depended on event stream until they found the one that had actually decrypted the thing. So it was like they had to just try thousands of things until they discovered that it was this Bitcoin wallet. Of course, by the time that they had noticed that there was some encrypted thing inside the minified content and not inside the regular content, then obviously there was something was up, and they didn't know exactly what was the thing. Although now in hindsight, next time this happens, like some Bitcoin wallet's probably a pretty obvious guess.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that they had figured out that much. I think I also want to point out just the highlights of the community with people like Falling Snow, but also the others, like you mentioned, so many people digging into the code, and really the reverse engineers come out, right, and do all their Sherlock Holmes work to figure these things out. It's really quite amazing how fast and successful they are at tracing the trail here. Also, what's up with Write9 Control? Don't they know that Bitcoin is crashing right now? Like, come on, what's the deal? The value is way down.
I think they started working on this hack before it crashed as well.
If we could just get all cryptos to go back to zero, then maybe we'd have less problems like these out in the world.
Yeah, the analysis of a supply chain attack from Hayden Parker laid some of this out in terms of the backdoor would only be activated if the code was included in BitPay's open source wallet called Copay, or any forks that did not modify their project's description. So they're like Dominic is saying, it's very targeted. But I think one thing that I'm seeing here that's kind of interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, is GitHub and NPM are not a one-to-one. So it seemed like this person was able to deploy this sort of undetected in a way because they had done some merges on GitHub and then undone their work and did a deploy or something like that to NPM. And so NPM and GitHub are out of sync, which I'm sure is very common to be a case. But I'm wondering if that's not a line for security vulnerability whenever something that is on GitHub in source code does not somehow match, as a code repository, place doesn't match NPM, the final built module. What do you guys think about that? The misnomer there, the anomaly, the fact that they're not connected or they're not the same.
There is a number of ways that this particular attack could have been systematically prevented or made a lot more difficult to pull off or a lot easier to identify. And one of those is, you check that there's a deterministic, that the build product is deterministic from the source product. So the minified version of the code, like if someone else minifies the same code, it should produce the same result.
Right.
And if the unminified thing didn't include the encrypted stuff, then the output shouldn't include it. So a simple thing that you could do to prevent this kind of thing is, at least that would have detected this thing. Let's say there's this tool that you install your dependency tree, then you run this thing and it goes through all of the dependency tree, clones all of the repos, builds them all, and then checks that what you've installed is actually exactly the same, by down to a byte, as what was built. And if anything is different at all, then you flag you'll be like, that's something,
right.
There's something non-deterministic there.
Even from a maintainer's level, a maintainer isn't going to catch this unless they have the right kind of tooling, because no maintainer, I'm not going to say, well, maybe not no maintainer, but not many maintainers are going to confirm that what is on NPM is what is on GitHub. And especially if it's, minified or whatever, who's going to take that measure to ensure that, hey, I'm going to give commit access to this person, and I'm going to assume that they're not malicious because the previous commits, whatever. They're just not going to do that level of vetting. We need tooling in place to sort of, as you said, systematically catch this kind of exploit, because GitHub did not match NPM in this case.
Yeah, and this has been this issue of deterministic builds hasn't been on the radar, I think, until now, of the JavaScript community, but is something that Debian has spent the last couple of years moving to every Debian package, which is mostly compiled C, C++, etc., is fully deterministic now. So it means if two people build the same like compile the same program, then the built output will be exactly the same. So if you have like multiple trusted independent people building something and one of them is different, then you know that there's something up and possibly it's a Trojan inside of the compiler. Because this was like an attack like described like in the early 90s, by the creators of Unix, the trusting trust attack, which is it's pretty famous, but also like generally like no one had actually used it to do anything malicious that anyone was aware of, although there had been a benign Trojan inside of GCC for some years where it was just like something that when you compiled it, it went into it would insert itself into the compiled output and never appeared in the source code. And then when you use that to compile the next version of GCC, it inserted itself and didn't do anything bad. It was just, I guess it was probably just a funny prank.
Perhaps a good moment, Adam, to once again cross-promote an old episode we did, Reproducible Builds and Secure Software with Chris Lamb. We talked to Chris Lamb all about his work with reproducible builds and how that's going into the Debian and Ubuntu distributions back in February of 2017. So a couple of years ago, but man, that was a prescient show because it's come up so much lately, as these are definitely things that people are starting to realize are super important because we're having fallout from not having that as a feature of our package management tools. So go back and listen to that. We'll put that in the show notes if that is of interest to you.
This episode is brought to you by Linode, our cloud server of choice. It's so easy to get started. Head to linode.com/changelog, pick a plan, pick a distro, and pick a location, and in minutes deploy your Linode cloud server. They have drool-worthy hardware, native SSD cloud storage, 40 gigabit network, Intel E5 processors, simple, easy control panel, 99.9% uptime guaranteed. We are never down. 24/7 customer support, 10 data centers, 3 regions, anywhere in the world, they got you covered. Head to linode.com/changelog to get $20 in hosting credit. That's 4 months free. Once again, linode.com/changelog.
So we're talking about ways that these kinds of attacks can be prevented down the road, systematic things we can do. Or maybe we can't do them. Maybe certain platforms have to do them. Certainly maintainers have things that we can do. But you mentioned the deterministic builds or reproducible builds. But you also have some other things that could be features of our systems that would help from this kind of attack happening. You want to elaborate on those, Dominic?
Yeah, well, so firstly, I'm not like reproducible builds might have made it easier to
detect.
Like reproducible builds would have flagged this, but he might have gone to like if they had like checked in the malicious code into like maybe no one would have noticed. Like once it was apparent that it was like that there was some encrypted code that was being run, it was like something is definitely very suspicious. But if it had been unencrypted, that might have actually been like more effective. Like we don't really know. It could have been overkill to encrypt it. And so that would have actually gotten past a reproducible build because the bad would have been just hiding in plain sight. And the other thing is that the attack depended on the event stream code doing several things that, rather the flat map code doing several things that really had no business doing. So to like successfully steal people's Bitcoin keys, then send them back to the attacker, it needs to do network I/O, and event stream itself didn't need to do that. Like that is completely outside the stated purpose of event stream. The same with like accessing the crypto module and that sort of stuff. So if there was like a specific list of what permissions on a module basis that
you could request from
that event that a module depended on. So event stream was like it doesn't do any I/O. It doesn't do any like networking or file access. It just glues other things together. Then compromising event stream wouldn't have been useful for this attack. You would have to compromise something else that had access. And then, of course, it monkey patched the constructor of something that then it got the keys from. and you had like a good sandboxing thing, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I'd sort of been aware of this stuff being developed for some years. There's this thing called like e-rights, which is like quite old. This guy, Mark Miller, who was also the chief architect on the Xanadu project. Are you familiar with Xanadu?
Mm-mm.
Oh, this is really getting into the, this is something you should definitely know about. Maybe you should do like a whole podcast on it. So this guy, Ted Nelson, basically had this idea for the World Wide Web, but better. And it had like versioning built in, and you had this thing called transclusion where like a link like just embedded other documents and stuff. But the thing is, he had this idea in the 1960s and then spent like several decades trying to develop it. And by the time that the web came along, the first release of the web from Tim Berners-Lee cited Xanadu and was like, I wish Xanadu was ready, but given that it isn't, here's a crappy version of the idea that I cobbled together. And the sort of Project Xanadu was like a far, far more ambitious idea that, it actually inspired a lot of people, but failed to deliver any usable software. It's the history of it is quite amazing because it did have quite a big impact in terms of ideas, but it didn't successfully deliver anything. But it still was instrumental in actually creating the web. But it was just actually the creators of Xanadu was the web is actually a really disappointing, crappy version of what we were trying to do.
I found Project Xanadu on Wikipedia, reading a little bit along, and I agree this would make a great show to do separately. But what's interesting is that there was a working deliverable called Open Xanadu that was released in 2014. It was called Open because you can see all the parts, so not necessarily open source, but just open to see. On the site, the creators claim that Tim Berners-Lee stole their idea and that the World Wide Web is a bizarre structure created by arbitrary initiatives of varied people and has a terrible programming language. And the web is a complex maze. I'm not sure if this was Mark Miller doing this or somebody that was inspired by Mark Miller's work on Xanadu, but it's super interesting. And this is just Wikipedia, by the way, so take it for what it's worth.
So Mark Miller was the chief architect, but the Xanadu project was started by Ted Nelson. I actually, had the privilege of meeting Mark Miller a few months ago as well. And I had been aware of his work in e-rights since then, which was basically the idea was he was trying to build a programming language that was optimized for security auditing. You could definitely say that this part can only access these things, and unless something has been passed into it, it can't interfere with that other thing in any way at all. And there's this old website that explains this, and it looks like all really excellent ideas that for mainstream computing, which is basically being completely ignorant of any of security. Security is just a huge pain in the butt for most people. They had envisioned this is how we could solve all of these problems, and been working on it this for decades now. But interestingly, in the meantime, they had actually infiltrated Google and had managed to add several features to JavaScript that enabled JavaScript to have all the pieces of the puzzle to create this in JavaScript.
Who's they? You said they infiltrated Google. You're talking about Mark Miller?
Yeah, Mark Miller. Infiltrated perhaps is the wrong word, but he worked at Google for several years. And I understand it was, who's the other JavaScript guy? Douglas
Crockford.
Crockford, yeah. Crockford had been JavaScript is nearly has all of the features you need to make this secure thing. So this produced, I think this is my understanding, strict mode and object.freeze. And so now left Google is working at this thing, Agoric, which has produced now a thing, secure ECMAScript, SES, and there's a bunch of versions that are more or less constrained or something like this, but it gives you a pure JavaScript way. You don't need a special platform. So you don't need to change the background. This already works in a web browser, and you could lock off some code. So you couldn't have completely user provided code that then runs in a context that you can be confident it's not touching other things. So it can't do things like prototypes, and it can't do anything. It can't use things that haven't been passed to it directly. Many people will point out that getting sandboxing right is extremely difficult, and that's absolutely true. But luckily, these people have been literally spent their careers working on this.
So who would be the people that would tasked with working on something like this? Are we talking about browser vendors, Node? Are we talking about package managers? Where would the sandboxing and the application of these principles go?
So adding it to an actual deployed application that was originally created without this stuff in mind. So currently written code and applications. running and with NPM and stuff today, someone would have to decide, I guess, what APIs things have access to and stuff like that. So
it'd be easier to start fresh.
Well, I think it could actually be added like in user space. You might have to go through and be like, this thing can have these permissions or not.
Well, you mentioned earlier that it didn't need IO access, right? So that would be an easy one. So if ever this module ever requested or used IO, then something is very odd about its behavior because its described behavior says that it shouldn't use certain APIs or certain feature sets, essentially.
Yeah, and for the most part, unless they do something like really weird and dynamic, probably 95% of modules would be like an easy call to see what they should be able to or shouldn't be able to access. But, you can just weed out dependencies that like do weird stuff.
So as the attacker, though, let's say I have what Right9 Control had. I have access to the source code as well as the deployment mechanism. Even in this world where there is this sandbox, could I not simply, I would have to provide the whitelist as the author of event stream. So would I not just add IO to my list of things that I require and then deploy? Maybe you could have at that point some sort of like, this permissions have changed. Do you want to allow this to do that kind of a thing?
Yeah, what a world.
Yeah, I think it would be a good improvement. Like Android phones or et cetera have this kind of permission system. And I think most people just like click okay. So
exactly.
Would be
we're pushing the attack vector up the stack to the end user who's more likely to not even know what the heck it's talking about and say yes.
Yeah. But on the other hand, if when you install a module, if you made the call then and it was actually controlled, because you end up things with like BitPay didn't actually install event stream. They installed something that installed event stream.
Right.
So when you install something, you say like, oh, that should never do such and such. Then it's sort of basically a question of like, who do you trust? And perhaps if you were something like a high value target, such as a Bitcoin wallet, then you would just go through the entire tree and be like, what should this be able to access? What should this be able to access? Which like might take you a while if you have hundreds of modules, but it would definitely like give you peace of mind and be like an appropriate action and would, this kind of attack would really be even worth bothering with.
Well, you said something there too, like to trust, right? So we talked through sort of like systematic ways to prevent this, which seem to have varying degrees of user experience degradation and, or as you said, Jerod, just pushing the attack vector up or down the stack to different places that, may have ill effects like clicking OK or just bothering the developer at some point, or maybe even the user at some point with things that they're just not concerned with. And the other is sort of like what you said there, Dominic, around trust. And even in your README, the statement on event stream compromise, you mentioned two strong solutions to this problem. One being, paying the maintainers, but the additive to that was only depending upon modules that are definitely maintained. So I'd like to kind of get your idea of what definitely maintained means to you, because your version of that and my version of that and Jerod's version of that may or may not be the same. And then point two you made was when you depend on something, you should take part in maintaining it. So maybe we can break down those levels of solutions where it's like, rather than changing how the software only makes sense, reminding people to trust their dependency tree. But how do you do that?
Yeah, well, a big part of the problem here from the social perspective is that the tooling basically assumed I was responsible for like this module and had like full control over the decisions made about it. So when you delegated to someone who had installed something that installed event stream, you didn't have control over who made the decisions about event stream. So I was able to it was basically like I was able to just transfer the right of access to event stream. And I didn't want to have the rights to control event stream because I had no interest in I had no skin in the game.
You abandoned it basically.
Yeah.
You wanted to be out.
It's sort of this really weird thing that only happens in software. Like there's no other part of it's really hard to make an analogy to some other part of life where a hobbyist ends up maintaining some kind of critical infrastructure while they don't want to.
Yeah.
It's insane.
What's funny is that maybe I could break this down a little bit, is that you to the world own this thing. You personally have moved on from the concept, the paradigm, and the idea, Meanwhile, the rest of the world found it to be useful years later, and made it widely useful in many different ways. It's been included in several different packages and very popular, organizations. But meanwhile, the original creator, who's as described earlier, is a prolific open source developer, has since moved on, not only from the project or desire to move on, and in some cases with some angst because you had some pain with telling people that you were not going to be involved anymore. And you mentioned just sort of the mental tear on yourself there. But the fact that you've just moved on from it, but the world hasn't, yet you're still involved, or at least somehow in the blame zone.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to mention that module itself hadn't changed at all in any significant way over that entire time. It became popular for what originally it was back when I thought it was a good idea, and so it hadn't really I hadn't really been doing anything except for just ignoring it and reluctantly, occasionally responding to something or merging workers. Basically, it was just a pain in the.
So how do you deal with that then? I guess maybe that's where we can camp on. Is if this is now a thorn in your side, you've moved on from it. The world still feels it's popular. 2 million downloads per week, according to Tidelift. Used by large open source projects like Angular, Mocha, Electron, and others. Other commercial code bases from organizations like BBC News and Microsoft. So clearly somebody had some value in this thing, but you want to move on. How do we collectively as open source look at this scenario and say, how can we allow maintainers to move on in ways that a project that is widely used, or at least widely useful to many people or organizations, how do we let them move on in a way that keeps the code base secure and doesn't allow something like this to happen? Do we hand this off to support organizations like Ruby Together might be? In this case, it's a JavaScript NPM module, so maybe Ruby Together isn't the right one, but that example there where you have sort of organizations that are intended to be sort of this catch-all that are trusted or could be trusted or have some sort of vested interest in the future of an ecosystem.
Yeah, basically when something is new and exciting, the thing is most of the code on NPM was created by there's probably some big things that have people are working on for their job, but the vast majority of them are small things that people have created in their own time or to fix their own little problem. And some of those things, such as event stream, became hugely dependent on. And the kind of thought process and skills and interest and motivation for creating those in the first place is very different from the thing that is required to maintain them in the long term. So once something has depended as people are using something, then you don't really want to change it. It's better because it's if you break anything, loads of people are going to be upset with you. Everyone's going to have a bad time. It's better just not to change anything at all. Just keep it completely stable. And that's not really very fun. When you've created it in the first time, it was a new idea that you were exploring and something worked really well. It's fun for a while, but by the time it's popular, maintaining it as a job, and it's not a job that you necessarily signed up for. It would be much better if it was maintained by someone who saw it as their job.
So what you're saying is if somehow over these 700-ish modules you've created in your career, I think you mentioned roughly 100 or so you decided to abandon a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago. 300. Okay, thanks for correcting my math there. What you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is if there was a way for you to be paid a fee that makes sense, a fair fee, to continue to be a security measure, a maintainer even, if that's necessary, to improve. Most of these are mature and stable and don't need to be changed much. You would stay on board as an on-the-hook person to provide maintenance and security.
Sure, yeah. There's only there were 300 modules, but only a small handful of them were really popular. And this, I think this is the other thing too, is the most popular ones are completely boring. The things that I'm personally most proud of and the most interesting, the most interesting problems are not really very popular at all. The things that have millions of downloads, my most downloaded module, which I actually still use, is RC, which is a configuration loader. It just loads configuration file. And, it's kind of like pop music. It's to have the broadest appeal, it has to be completely bland and uninteresting, such that the broadest spectrum of people can relate to it. Like everyone has to load a configuration file at
general purpose use.
Yeah, there's no exciting way to do it though.
I agree with you completely. I think that's why Nadia Ekbal's report about open source funding and sustainability was so well named, Roads and Bridges, because we're really talking about infrastructure. And the phenomenon, I guess, that we're actually seeing here is people accidentally create infrastructure. They're not trying to. They're solving problems they have, but it turns out those problems are general use and easy to pull in and easy to deploy. And over time, it becomes infrastructure. And the fact is that nobody wants to work on a road or nobody wants to work on a bridge, right? Maybe building that bridge was fun and interesting problem for engineering, but it's just maintenance. And so we accidentally create these roads and bridges and they become public infrastructure, or not public, but you know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, I'm supposed to just work on this road for you for free. And so that's where the real rubber hits the road, is like, we accidentally got here. Right? You accidentally became the maintainer of a thing that you wrote 7 years ago and people are still using today and you have zero interest in. And so that's where I think that's why many of us turn to, okay, now I'm ready for a financial compensation to take care of this, because I also wouldn't maintain a road for free.
Well, to that effect too, you don't have a lot of people come by this perfectly fine bridge saying, you know what, I think I'm going to build a different bridge right next to it, slightly better because I want to. Like RC works, or in this case, Event Stream works. Why would you come by and rebuild it? As you mentioned, like that's why it becomes accidental infrastructure.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, the metaphor falls apart because we can clone and fork, these things. Like you can't clone and fork a bridge, but
right,
to a certain degree, it fits.
Right.
Anything to respond to that? Do you agree with that analysis? Is that how you feel?
Well, yeah, but the thing I'd like to stress is that when I talk about like paying the developers, like that's actually not my first choice. Like I like hobbyist style programming. I don't necessarily want that. I would kind of rather people who like depend on that code for their job take over maintaining such code. My point is just that the incentives of like who's going to take responsibility for this should be like who ends up actually feeling the impact. The problem here was that someone who wasn't interested in having that responsibility ended up with the responsibility. If people who actually like needed that thing ended up being the ones maintaining that, and if I didn't even, like the other thing is like you kind of have, like you can give it away, you can hand things off to someone who will maintain it, but you're still responsible for figuring out who that was. And that's what I thought I was doing.
And to speak a little bit to the in general, this system does work. I've seen many cases where somebody writes a thing, an open source thing, and then other businesses or enterprises come to rely on it, and the original maintainers do not use it anymore. And then the businesses or the enterprises or whoever currently has a stake in it, they take over maintainership. And this is something that happens. So it's not like that. And I'm glad I agree with you. I think that's the best way for it to work. In lieu of that, like when that doesn't happen, pay the maintainer if you don't want to maintain it, but somebody has to. And I do see it working. So it's not like it's utterly broken. It's just that there are times where things fall through the cracks and then we have issues.
Yeah. A lot of people who were like upset about this were like, why couldn't you just like depreciated it or just like stopped maintaining it and not giving it away? And the funny thing is like, that's actually was a decision that I was coming to, and I actually did that for like hundreds of modules, like shortly after. But coming to that decision when I had like hundreds of modules that I didn't want wasn't like a one at the time thing. It was like a bulk decision that involved like writing scripts to disown like all of these modules. Like it was like the current tools don't provide like a good way of like doing this in bulk. Like for example, so I had moved all of these modules off of my NPM, but I hadn't archived them on GitHub yet, and I just simply hadn't got around to it. Like I felt that removing myself from them on NPM was sufficiently cathartic that I was like, oh, I'll just come back and do the like GitHub thing later. If I had done that before it was reported, then they wouldn't have been able to post the issue on that thing. I don't know. Something else would have had to happen.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at GoCD. GoCD is an open source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. Check them out at gocd.org or on GitHub at github.com/GoCD. GoCD provides continuous delivery out of the box with its built-in pipelines, advanced traceability, and value stream visualization. With GoCD, you can easily model, orchestrate, and visualize complex workflows from end to end with no problem. They support Kubernetes and modern infrastructure with elastic on-demand agents and cloud deployments. To learn more about GoCD, visit gocd.org/changelog. It's free to use, and they have professional support and enterprise add-ons available from ThoughtWorks. Once again, gocd.org/changelog. And by our friends at Red Hat who produced the podcast Command Line Heroes. Today we're featuring a segment from Season 2, Episode 7, titled At Your Serverless.
But now, of course, all over the United States of America and all over the world, the internet is revolutionizing our lives.
It's 1998. Google just hired its first employee, and Vice President Al Gore is talking to the press.
This technology is still in its infancy. When President Bill Clinton and I came into the White House, there were only 50 sites. And look at it now. I got a bouquet of virtual flowers on my birthday.
Okay, I can sense your eyebrow arching already. Why am I playing you some bit of 20-year-old internet history? It's because I want to remind you that the basics of the internet are still the same. Today, developers talk a lot about going serverless, which sounds like Al Gore's client-server internet just got trashed. And if we're not careful, we can abstract away so much infrastructure that we forget there are still servers out there doing their server thing.
All right, learn more, listen, and subscribe to this awesome podcast at redhat.com/heroes. Once again, redhat.com/heroes.
So we've talked about some technical things we can do. Some of us as a community, we talked about some, better practices in terms of like consumers of these things is either hop in and help maintain, throw some cash at the problem, which is always nice, but hard to convince upper management to do. As maintainers, Dominic, it sounds like you hit on some of the things, which is like, what is a good practice for abandoning a project? And you hit on them, like you said, a few weeks after you gave access here, which, in a bit of serendipity, we've allowed the community to have this conversation and really to talk about these things. And so we can all together learn and realize what we should be doing about our projects that we're maintaining. One of the suggestions in our community Slack, I think it was Dan McLean brought it up in terms of like how it should work or what would be a good way of going about it is basically, he says, I'm really starting to think that the model should be, if you don't want to maintain it anymore, update the README and let it be forked. Forks have to establish their own reputation. I would hate to have my name used maliciously at the same time. I don't feel that I need to keep maintaining something. And then he says, look at can, which was a good example of a situation where there was can. This is in the Ruby community. Can was maintained by Ryan Bates, created and maintained by Ryan Bates, and abandoned by him when he took his long hiatus from the internet. And then the community came around and created can, established their own reputation by improving that, maintaining that, and eventually people switched over. So that seems to make sense to me in terms of like the passing of the torch. That seems like the hardest part because in the situation where you're like, I'm just done, but there's people who still depend upon it. How do we like actually pass the torch in a way that makes sense without, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, obviously, the solution is something like that. And in this particular case, it was just really a matter of timing that meant that hadn't happened. Like if Right now had come to me like a month later, then I might have been like, sorry, I abandoned that module. I can't give it to you.
Which makes sense on GitHub side, but from on the NPM side, in terms of just the mechanics of that, if there's still hundreds of thousands of dependents out there with event stream in their package.json, how would they know it's abandoned? How would they be able to, come back and see, okay, here's a new one. It's event stream dash some namespace, of a new person, and then maybe eventually switch over. Are those things that are unsolved problems at this point?
There is a deprecation option, but I never really felt like deprecating something. Like the code worked, it was fine. I hadn't even needed, like, nothing really needed to change. So it didn't really feel right to me to be like, depreciate, because it was just leaving it as it is. It's like fine. So like it still worked. Like I hadn't really changed it. It didn't need improvements.
Well, let me throw out a hypothetical then. So let's say that event stream is out there on NPM in its current version, and it's just fine. And then some sort of dependency of event stream has an issue, and the NPM security team detects it and goes out and says, okay, everybody who depends on this version of event stream, you're going to need to bump your version up. And so event stream needs to be patched, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's when
that's the case, right?
That's when someone needs to fork it.
There's other issues around that, though, is like being able to adopt eventually an abandoned package name, too. So assuming event stream is a super cool name, it's abandoned, there's a way to flag it as abandoned. After a while, someone, like that's the other, I guess, smaller, less concerning issue is that, because this has been talked about when Kick, Left Pad, and all that stuff.
What if I want to name my thing Kick?
Yeah.
Then what do I do?
Yeah, I guess you have to sue somebody. You might want to take over the abandoned name or something like that. But that's what I was thinking. Is like, if you could just allow somebody, but that means claiming and owning a name on NPM becomes far more valuable. Because if you claim and own it originally, even if it's not used, I mean, obviously NPM could do whatever they want to circumvent those rules as well. But they kind of inch back into some sort of policing model of the community and what is and is not allowed. So they become more and more vulnerable to attacks of their choosing by just basically how they choose to run things. But if you were able to, in this case, if there was a way for Dominic to say to NPM, hey, I want to abandon this, let me attach an abandon flag. This is what you're saying, Jerod, where the dependency tree now knows that. So as I, ever use this package or dependency, then I'm somehow made aware, like, hey, this dependency you have in your tree has been flagged as abandoned on NPM. There may be something you want to look at here, and or look for a fork, or create your own fork and begin a new line of trust. And that what you're saying is that if that's the case, then this abandoned version is cemented in stone and frozen forever.
So let's say I had been just be like, okay, I've abandoned event stream. Then, like, if that somehow prompted the users of event stream users to like update, then that would actually be a prime time for like the attacker to come along and be like, oh, I'm maintaining a new fork of event stream. It's, I'll respond to things. I like use it, that sort of stuff. Then people like, opt into that.
Right.
Like you could pull off the same kind of thing there.
Yeah, you're right.
Don't you think, though, if that's the case, though, that would be seen as like the same model comes back into human choices, which is, to part one of your statement in your README was basically like, hey, make sure you trust the maintainers, right? So that would go back into rule one for you, at least based on your two strong solutions, is like a human should trust this new fork and there should be reasons to, and that's brand new opt-in, a brand new line of trust, and a brand new line of scrutinization versus this inherited one.
Yeah, but continuing to use the abandoned code might actually be better unless an update is really needed. The funny thing is, like, compared to, what last year, the WannaCry worm, that was a hack that only affected people that hadn't updated their code. This one was one that only affected people who had updated their code.
Well, you're screwed either way then, I guess.
Yeah.
Update or don't update. You're in the wrong.
We're all in trouble.
That's right.
So this leads to a follow-up, just as an end user of dependencies. Like as a developer, then, I've always looked at dependencies with two extremes. On the one extreme, you have dependency hell, where it's just like pull it all in all the time, right? Like I don't write my own code. I'm just gluing my dependencies together to cobble something together. And the other side, we have like the pristine, not invented here syndrome, where it's like, I know every single line of code in this thing, and I've written every single line of code. And those are kind of the two extreme angles you can take at dependencies. And I've always said it's a balance, it's a trade-off. You have to like make these decisions with as much information as possible. But the older I get, the more I'm starting to like err on the side of not invented here syndrome, because it seems like the trade-offs to having more dependencies is worse than the trade-offs of having to write some more code myself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have been accused more than a few times of not inventing here, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that I am satisfied with someone else's solution and have used that instead.
What are some of the heuristics for you? Like, what are the things that make you satisfied? Is it personal relationship with the maintainer, or at least maybe a reputation of quality, or is it your own inspection of their code? What makes you more comfortable than less comfortable?
I mean, for things like I didn't create JavaScript or implement my own JavaScript. Or improve my JavaScript. Like there's things like it's like that problem is too big to handle when here's like a good thing that like does it. One is like if it's like a small thing that I could do, I would sort of and look for a whole bunch of options or something. I would evaluate them in terms of like, is this sufficiently compatible with my opinions? Like, would I do it the same way? Like, does this like make me really like mad or something like that? There's also some stuff like that would just be like a pain in the butt to create myself, like time zones.
Oh, time zones are easy. What are you talking about? Just kidding. It's like the bane of every programmer's existence is time and time zones.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's especially worse if you live in New Zealand because you're constantly
you're an edge case
with people. Yeah, people in other time zones. And the Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere one is fun too because you go in and out of daylight savings at different times. So between like, say, California and New Zealand, there's like 4 different possible differences where there's like, you can both be in daylight savings for a bit and then you're both out of it and then one of you's in, the other one's out. So it's like, and so you change like how many hours you are apart, like multiple times throughout the year.
Well,
I don't even think I really understand daylight savings time. There's times I think I understand it. And then there's like, then there's times I'm like, no, what you thought was daylight savings time is not. So I just don't even know. I just know I'm where I'm at, and this is my time right now. What's your time right now?
It's one of the worst ideas ever.
Oh man, and there's certain small precincts, geographic areas which will not abide by it,
right?
Like states or cities or countries.
It's like, how do you even understand time and the Earth's rotation and the things that actually calculate that and the things that have been established scientifically ages ago to make time and us be in sync with what we think time really is. It gets really deep.
And time zones are political, and political things change with new administrations, and so there's it's a complete mess. But one thing we haven't asked yet, and we did mention at the top, Dominic, that it was a lot of conversation. This has been the big topic of the week around these parts, and so I think that's a good thing. I'm curious about you personally. It sounds like you've taken it all pretty well, but no doubt there were some people that were mad or were criticizing what you did. Why couldn't he have just done this? Why did he do that? Curious what your overall feelings are with regard to the way the community has received this, the way it's gone. Have you gotten a lot of backlash? Do you feel attacked? Do you feel loved? How do you feeling?
I received many like personal messages of support from like other like old friends and like other open source developers, and sometimes like random strangers who had admired my work and stuff like this. So I really felt quite boosted overall from that, and that certainly gave me the confidence to like use this to like draw attention to what I feel is the plight of the open source developer and like what are like the systematic ways that something like this can be like approached and addressed. And I think the way that I've kind of like been very determined to like shirk responsibility for actually like adding the thing, like actually helped a lot there, because it made all the people who were like thought I should, apologize or something. It made them like way more upset.
You were very nonchalant about it all.
Yeah.
Which to me was refreshing because I could tell that you were kind of cool, calm, and collected about it. And just like this is the situation, the conversation around, this being a fun project for you. Like this was just a thing that was fun. It was no longer fun. And that's what you said in your statement is if it's not fun anymore, you get literally nothing from maintaining a popular package. That's just the cold hard facts.
You can't be or act guilty if you're not guilty, right? If you don't have a guilty conscience in the scheme of this, then you're not going to run around acting guilty or feeling guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also knew that like we're kind of like weird to, people who like enjoy programming for fun, but there's still quite a few of us out there, and like many of them and lots of them are my friends. So I felt like I was speaking for these people.
As Brett Cannon said in that recent episode, Jerod, I forget which number it is. Help me out if you can, but open source maintainers own nothing. I believe that's somewhat a direct quote. Correct me if I'm wrong. We can pull up the transcripts and confirm that, but just basically like, they've maintainers of projects haven't signed on for we'll maintain this, we'll be responsible for everything in this forever. It's in their good interest and their heartfelt interest to create an open source in the first place, and it's your choice to use it, so they owe you nothing.
The other thing I want to say is, like, on one level, like, creating open source is like fun, like challenging, interesting technical problems, but also the social side of it. For the most part, you're just like solving problems with friends and helping each other out, and no one is like the boss of anyone. So if you want to like get things done, you can persuade people. And like sometimes people get wound up in like the strong emotions because like it's things that people feel strongly about. But on the whole, it's a very rewarding kind of like mode of interaction. And I wish that like more of life gave you the ability to like affect change on things that affect you, like you get in open source. Like I think that's a big part of like why I've continued to do it for like the best part of a decade.
Absolutely. And Dominic, we just want to say thank you for all the work that you have done. No doubt you've brought lots of value to lots of people, countless people around the world that you've never even met. And the beauty of open source, all these modules on NPM, the work that you're doing in the JavaScript community. Hey, we definitely want to get you back to talk about Scuttlebutt and the interesting stuff there. Talk about hacking with your friends. This seems like a very cool kind of offline social networking thing happening, which is very much in the spirit of what we like to cover on the changelog. So definitely wanted to have you back, but we're happy to have you. We're glad you joined us, especially on short notice, to talk about this situation. Any last words from you with regard to open event stream or what's happened or anything else you'd like to say to the open source community before we let you go?
Yeah, I think despite all this, I think open source is like a great idea and we need more of it and more sharing, not less. If we let things like this make us too suspicious of each other to like share and collaborate, then the terrorists win, and that would be worse than being hacked occasionally.
I think that's a perfect note to end on right there.
Yeah.
Dominic, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of The Changelog. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy the show, if you got any value from it, do us a favor, go into iTunes or Apple Podcasts and rate the show, review it. It helps us get ranked up inside those indexes so more people find the show. If you're using Overcast, go ahead and favorite it. And of course, tweet a link to a friend or share it wherever you might want to. Huge thanks to our sponsors, Rollbar, Linode, GoCD, and Red Hat's Command Line Heroes. Also, thanks to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. And we're able to move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. We trust Linode because they're fast, they keep it simple. Check them out at linode.com/changelog. Today's show is hosted by myself, Adam Stukowiak, and Jerod Santo. Editing, mixing, and mastering was done by Tim Smith. And the music is done by the ever awesome Breakmaster Cylinder. If you want to hear more episodes like this, subscribe to our master feed at changelog.com/master or go into your podcast app and search for Changelog Master. You'll find it. Subscribe, get all of our shows, as well as some extras that only hit the master feed. Once again, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.